You become a pagan by saying, I'm becoming a pagan. There's no particular, there's no full moon school, no Hebrew school, no Greek Orthodox school. There's no Catholic school for becoming a pagan. It's just a matter of choice, and the way that some of the ways that you can do that is to begin reading, and that's the first thing I would suggest many people do. It's very different for many people, and again, this is coming from, I'm answering this from a perspective of someone who's outside of the crowd, no family connection, no friend connection, somebody that wants to get involved in paganism in their own way. But remember, paganism is a very large umbrella. Paganism is anything that is non-Abrahamic, a non-Abrahamic religion, Judaism, Christianity, or Muslim. So anything is pagan that is not of the top three. It's just a matter of choosing, what path do you want to follow. I always say start by reading, and maybe I didn't think about doing it for today, but perhaps next week I'll remember, and I'll let you make a note of this, is to offer a reading list of things to get you started. Yeah, I go with the ums, I'm going to stop that. A reading list would basically consist of, for me, my first reading list was, and I think I've talked about this before, Scott Cunningham's Wicked for the Solitary Practitioner, Buckland's Complete Guide to Witchcraft. Covencraft is a great book. It talks about covens. If you're interested about covens, there's a wonderful book, the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft, which is excellent. I also suggest reading fictional novels with magical undertones. The Mists of Babylon is a great one. It's the story of Arthur told from the goddess's perspective, and a fantastic film if you haven't seen the film. Hermann Hesse, believe it or not, very metaphysical, very classic literature, but Siddhartha tells the story of the Buddha, but Siddhartha is a separate character from the Buddha, and it's a wonderful interpretation of that particular story. Anything by Dion Fortune, Moon Goddess or Sea Goddess, I forgot which one it was, is an excellent book. Any of Crowley's, Aleister Crowley's fictional novels are excellent as well. Again, I believe one of them was called Moonchild, was an excellent book, actually, the one that Crowley wrote. For practice also as well, of course, I'm going to say my book, The Book of One, which covers very basic metaphysical concepts and philosophical perceptions of our planet from a source's point of view, so to speak. As well, the Tao Te Ching, which is very similar to my book. The Bhagavad Gita, by all means, read it, the story of Krishna and Arjuna. I forgot what the name is. It's been about 20 years. And then anything by Joseph Campbell. If you can get the series, The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, by all means. I was lucky enough to find a file somewhere. I forgot who put it up. I got a file of it, and I got like all the videos with Bill Moyer's excellent, excellent series. I believe it's a must for anyone that wants to study paganism because it covers all of paganism, all of mythology, and the practices and whatnot. Someone's asking Dion who? Dion Fortune, just like, fortune teller. Dion Fortune was the female version of Aleister Crowley, but she was a little bit nicer, a lot nicer, or had a better reputation during the early 20th century. And that's going into like high magic, and we'll get into that probably next week as well. But today, for this, I'm just covering the reading list that I'm talking about. Excuse me. Reading notes and drinking water, not a good combination. Alrighty. So going back to becoming pagan, Sorry about that. Reading. Continue reading. Do all you can to read as much as you can. Get as much information. And the reason why I say, and don't get stuck in the reading though. I mean, yeah, book witches are great, but don't be stuck in the books. The books are to give you and again, this goes on to answering how do I become pagan. The books are to give you an overview, an informational overview of what it is that you're moving yourself into. There's something that I always say, and I say this about a lot of things, but I started saying it when I was teaching my first coven. If you're going to practice witchcraft, you have to practice witchcraft. And that doesn't mean wearing black all the time. That doesn't mean going to, comic book conventions all the time, or going to Renaissance fairs all the time. It doesn't mean, you know, acting like a witch or just reading books about a witch. It's about being one. It's about walking the path. So to practice witchcraft, to practice neo-paganism, you you're some you must walk the path. Understand the basics. Get a foundation. The books are there to provide a foundation. When we get stuck in the idea of what the books have to offer, you're exactly that. You're just stuck. So how do I become a pagan? I read a lot. We read as many books as we can, get as much information as we can, but then we have to put it into practice. And you don't need a coven. We're going to move into this now, move into this part of becoming a pagan, a neo-pagan. I'm kind of covering right now. You don't need to be in a coven to become a practicing pagan. You don't need to be in a grove or whatever it might be. You could be a solitary practitioner. Sometimes I'm a solitary practitioner. Sometimes I'm in a larger public group. Sometimes I'm in my private coven. For years, I was a solitary practitioner, probably for about 3 or 4 years before I moved up here to Roanoke. I would probably suggest one of the best ways that you can do is to do a self-dedication ceremony. You can find them anywhere on the internet. Scott Cunningham has a wonderful version of it, self-dedication ceremony. And basically all a self-dedication ceremony is you're creating a sacred space, you're allowing yourself to alter your state of consciousness into a meditative state where you can connect with spirit, and you're presenting yourself to the old gods, the old ways, the old concepts, the old energies that are now waking up, of course. So it's just an introduction of your being to the greater being of neo-paganism and all that has to entail. It's a symbolic gesture. We covered it last week a little bit, but I'll cover it again. And physical initiation is not the same as spiritual initiation. Physical initiation is strictly a symbolic act. Kind of like, what do we call it? I'm forgetting. My brain's getting old. I've got too much information in it. There's certain kinds of witchcraft which are just symbolic of something greater. One of the kicks I'm on right now that I'm working with a student that I'm coaching is that the physical work that you're doing on the physical plane must be elevated onto the mental, astral, and spiritual plane. So going through the motions in the physical realm, you must also do it mentally and spiritually. Bring it up into that higher level. Visualize it, feel it going on in your mind and in your higher self. The same thing with initiation. When we do an initiation, it's just a physical act, unless you are tapping into that astral, mystical, spiritual realm and allowing that energy to come through. If you don't feel anything, you've just done a physical representation. You haven't done a true spiritual initiation. Now, that's not to say that when you do the spiritual initiation, or dedication for that matter, sometimes it takes a few days, sometimes it takes a few hours. For example, a Reiki, and Reiki, well, I guess Reiki does fall under paganism. A Reiki initiation, for my first degree Reiki initiation, about 4 hours after I had the attunement, I had not felt anything during the attunement. But 4 hours later, man, I just started crying and crying and crying and could not stop crying for about I would say 2 or 3 hours. I was just weeping, not bawling or anything, but just weeping, and the tears just kept flowing out, flowing out. And I go to my Reiki master the following week, and I was like, "What is this?" I just couldn't stop crying for 3 hours. And she's like, "Your body is detoxing of negative emotions. Your body's detoxing of energetic blockages." So the point I'm trying to make is that it may not happen immediately. So if you do a dedication ceremony and you feel like you're just going through the motions, if you've opened yourself up to the spiritual realm, if you've connected with your higher self, the astral, the mystical, whatever it is, and you feel that connection, uh, you will feel it in time, whether it's a few hours later or a few days later. It's not instantaneous sometimes. Sometimes, actually, most of the time, it's fair to say. So covens, let's talk about what covens are ever so quickly. Covens are usually pretty tight-knit groups of pagans or neo-pagans or witches or Wiccans, not Satanists. We'll talk about them later. They're not neo-pagan, they're Abrahamic, and we'll understand that in just a moment. Um, when you are in a coven is a close-knit group of people who practice pagan, neo-pagan ceremony, ritual, magic, and have a sense of community. Covens, for the most part, are usually very private. They become a family, and to get into a coven, I know for me, I need to get to know you for at least a year or so before I'm going to accept you as a member of my coven, because you're my family. You know all of my secrets, and I want to know that I can trust you on a magical level, and you're not going to be yanking in weird entities or weird energies when I'm trying to, I don't know, celebrate, the goddess of fertility, whatever it might be. I'm just giving an example. So it's fair to say that covens they're not secretive. I mean, my group, we're pretty open. We're all public. We're not afraid to say our name. We even have a Facebook page, even though we don't really post much. But as far as our ceremonies, it's kind of like an AA meeting. What goes on here stays here, kind of like Las Vegas. Not that anything wild or crazy goes on, but it's just an intimate gathering of energies. So don't get angry if you don't get accepted into your first coven, or you reach out to a high priest or somebody or priestess, and you're like, "I want to join your coven." It's like, it doesn't work like that. Now there are groves and covens that are forming, and usually it's a priest or a priestess that's gathering a group of people together to form a coven. That's a great way to get in on the ground level. I think that I've done that. I've formed several covens in the past. It's usually a great way to pick the people you want to work with and establish a group together. So joining a forming coven is another great way. As well, there's a lot of public groups. Right now, Earth Spirit Rona, which is my public face of my neo-pagan practices, we do public ceremony. Usually you'll find public ceremonies available for the Sabbats, Imbolc, Beltane, Samhain. Usually you can get invited to those because those are normally not dealing with personal issues or personal healings or whatnot. The SBOB, the full moon ceremony, most likely is going to be private and coven only, but you can usually find a public group that's doing, Beltane or something like that. If you live in the Virginia area, there's a group here called Blue Ridge Beltane, which is wonderful. I went a few years ago. I think right now they're finding a new location, but we have like 200 people there, and it was just open to the public. 3 days of camping, doing ritual every day, bonfires, dancing, and that kind of stuff. That's a great way to get to know people. Find a pagan festival, find a pagan open public event. That's where you'll start to make community. Where you might find your priest, your priestess, your teacher, your elder, whatever it might be. One of the greatest one of the greatest complaints I get is that people want a teacher. How do I find a teacher? How do I find a teacher? The teacher will be provided, and I'm not. It's not a cliche when I say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Allow that to happen.